frequency histogram does bars. A frequency polygon has line segments. The rest of it's going to look exactly the same. So remember yesterday I put the midpoints of the bars and I connected them, so I superimposed it on the other one. So you saw it had the same look as that one. So for this guy, if whatever you can do, make sure you use your graph. You don't want to go only up to here and use this little section when you have this whole graph. So space these out. As best you can make those. They have to be equally spaced apart. This is your frequency again. You're gonna, for those of you that did the first one, you're gonna lay out the second one exactly the way you laid out the first one. Give me the x-axis the same and the y-axis the same. We cut our graph because our first midpoint was 30. Take it, go ahead. And then we did all the midpoints. I have plenty of graph paper up here, so if you need any, let me know. These were our classes of ages. We want to make sure we label both axes, and we want to make sure we give it a title. The title is exactly the same as you had before. The ages of the top, I don't know what's going on. 50 most powerful women in the world in 2012. Okay, so now instead of making a bar, we're just making a dot. So let's walk this through. The first one had a 2. So at 2, just put a dot instead of a bar. It's going to look the exact same as the one that you just did yesterday, but except bars, it's going to have line segments. At the second one, 39, it was a 5. Just go through and put all dots here. This one was a 12. 57 was 18. 66 was 11. 75 is 1 and 1. That should be a little lower than my 2, probably like down here somewhere. But again, my board is always off. Okay, now, frequency polygon says connect these with line segments, not a smooth line, a line segment. From here to here, from here to here, from here to here, just make line segments. Now the only other problem we're faced with is that graph is hanging there in the middle of my page. A graph should have a beginning and an end. A bar is different. But a line should have like a beginning and an end. It shouldn't just be smack in the middle of your page. So we're going to extend the left end down and make a midpoint before it, which doesn't really exist, but we're going to subtract 9 and make this be 21. We're just going to bring it down. We're going to do the same out here. We're going to add 9 and bring your midpoint down to the axis. A bar is different. You can put a bar anywhere, but a line, you really have to have like some beginning, some end. Hopefully yours looks a whole nicer because my board is crazy today. Important part, we want to make sure we label everything. A frequency polygon has to use the midpoints. Again. Question? Okay. So now the next one we're going to do is a relative frequency graph. So if you look in your book, on page 48, 46, let's just walk through their relative frequency. We did our column for relative frequency, 46. A relative frequency histogram is the same as your frequency histogram. It has bars. It's going to have the same exact shape as your relative frequency, as your frequency histogram, except one difference. The vertical scale measures the relative frequency. So these have decimals. But if we increment the decimals correctly, the bars will look exactly like your frequency histogram looks. They will be exactly the same shape and consistency. Now, you can use an upper class boundary or you can use a midpoint. I use the midpoint just because it's a bar. I like the midpoint in the bar. You can absolutely, like the other one, you can use the upper class boundary. You should make it consistent. If you use your frequency histogram with a midpoint, keep this one with a midpoint because they should look exactly the same. If you use an upper class boundary, use the upper class boundary here. When you do that on a bar, our first upper class boundary would go, say, over here. What was your upper class boundary? Your first one is 34.5. The only thing you're going to have to do with this is make me the beginning one here, 25.5. You just need a beginning one because everybody else will go by the end one. They will all go by the end ones. And it shows continuity. It's that little extra piece we put in there so that there's no gaps in your number line. You can't end one bar at 43 and start the other one at 44 and have a gap between them. So we use kind of like an accordion effect. We just pull out the bars a little bit. You'll never hit a 0.5, but on your graph, it'll be exactly the way you want it to be. I'm going to use the midpoint because we use the midpoints on the other ones. So now we're going to construct it with your data. So if you come down here, on the back of that page, give me the same exact x-axis, same exact one. You cut it, and you gave me all the ages. I'm going to show you an easy way to do the vertical. This is where we're going to say relative frequency. And again, we have a title. The ages of the 50 most powerful women in 2012. Basic way you're going to start. I need all these pieces out here. It's going to have the same look as your other one. So make it the same size if you can. Use the same amount of the graph paper that you used for the first one. Now your relative frequency has 2 decimals, or it has 3 decimals if you round it to 3 decimals. That's like money. Count it like money. So look at your relative frequency column. What's the highest amount of money you have in that column? 36 cents. Good. So we're going to go from 0 cents to 36 cents, or maybe 40 cents. So that's what's going to help you so that you don't write 0.5 as 0.05. So maybe I want to write 0.05, 0.10, 0.15, 0.20, 0.25, 0.30. I'm going to write it. 0.35. And that's as far as I have to go. And then 0.40 up here. Use whatever you can. I obviously went overboard, but God bless you. If you have to, 0.10s is a little bit spaced apart, but you can still do that. So you're going to point 36. You kind of want it to have almost the same look as your other one. Again, this is going to get you a bar. So your first one is 0.04. Make sure you stay inside, and that becomes your midpoint there. That's got to be the middle of your bar. Then 0.10. Then 0.24. 0.36. Going up a little bit over my thing. 0.22. And 0.02 and 0.02. This should look exactly like your frequency histogram looks. Does it have the same look? And if you want shading in, you can just kind of go like this. It makes it stand out on a graph paper, especially if you print so lightly. If you print light on your graph paper, you really don't see the difference in the bars because your lines kind of come into the graph paper. So if you just kind of draw like crooked lines like that, it kind of stands out a little bit more. So this has the same look as your frequency histogram, and it should. All I did was change that y-axis to a relative frequency, a part over whole.
Where are the numbers in the book?
Where are the numbers in the book? They're not in front of your chart. You know the chart that you made?
Yeah.
The chart that I had you make on the piece of paper? They're from this chart. You did not at least use it. Okay? So does this make sense? Relative frequency. The decimals. Yeah. We're using a midpoint, just like you did before. Here's your midpoint. Like that. Yep. And what's your relative frequency? 0.04. Now can I just see right here? See it says 0.6? 0.6 is the same as 66. 0.06 and 0.09 too. That's why if you think of it as money, it's a little easier to number that line. Take a minute and get the hang of thing. As your final, someone asked you to research this. This is what you're giving them. So your graph has to be impressionable. It has to explain what you did, give the results, and really leave a good impression on them. Questions at all on this one? Everybody finished with this part? Okay. The last graph we're going to do is called an ogive. This, believe it or not, is your cumulative frequency graph. So on page 47, and it's in your notes as well, we go through constructing an ogive. We call this is your cumulative frequency. It is a line graph, not a bar graph. It is a line graph. No. Oh boy. It is a line graph that displays the cumulative frequency of each class at its upper class boundary. Is everybody catching this? At the upper class boundary. What this does is shows growth up to that point, growth up to the next point, growth up to the next point. So we use the upper class boundary because that's up to the point we go. We don't want to use a midpoint because the midpoint would say, oh, it just went up to this point. We want to use the upper class boundary to show growth through that whole interval. We constructed your horizontal has the upper class boundary, and we're going to have to add one more boundary to the left. because again, your graph will kind of start. If this is my first upper class boundary, what is my 34.5? If I start here, where did this come from? I have to bring this down and give this the beginning part of this boundary, which was 25.5. This is the only thing I have to add so that it has a place to start. And it will keep going up, 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 and I don't add any extra. I go all the way up to my last one, 84, or whatever I was. 84 point, what was my last one? 88.8. 88.5. So I don't bring this down because my goal is to show growth. So the concept of a cumulative frequency says you grew up to here, then it grew up through here, all the way through, then it grew all the way through up to here, and it keeps on growing. Yes?
What would be the y-axis?
The y-axis is your cumulative frequency. Your horizontal axis is your boundaries, and your vertical axis is your cumulative frequency. So what is the highest number that this should go up to? 50. So between here and here, you're going to get 50. And then you're going to just chart it. And it's a line segment graph. This really makes more sense than the old bar graphs that we did. Because the bar graphs look like they were individual pieces. This actually shows me more growth to this. And this is what you want to display. So ready for the last one? Let's work on this. Let me find a piece of blank screen here somewhere. All right, start your axes on your last part of your graph. Nice. All right, start your axes on the last part of your graph. The same as it looks above, the same width and length like this. Give it the same title.
So what you would be going up on?
I'll show you in 1 second. Okay, this is my ages. This is my cumulative frequency. So I'm starting from here, 0, and I need to get to 50. So count yours. See if you can space them apart. Maybe every 3, give me 10. Maybe every 4, give me 10. Your ages, don't forget, are going to be your upper class boundary, but the very first one, you have to include the lower class boundary. Because otherwise my graph is going to be standing there and not have a beginning. So this is my upper class boundary. Keep going with your upper class boundary. You can just keep adding 9 to those. Remember, you're using your cumulative frequency on this. You want to show growth as we go. You want to keep accumulating everything that's gone up. Well, we're accumulating all these ages. And this doesn't make sense to really have a cumulative frequency one, but God bless you.
Thank you.
But we'll do it anyway. Then you start to plot. Leave the first one because you're going to start at 35.4. That's a 2. Yes. That's your last class boundary, upper class boundary. Note for your table. all of these. Remember, you're using these guys. You want your boundaries. 79.5, 88.5. Use your upper class boundaries. It really makes sense. Then this went to 7. Then this went to 19. 37. 48. 49. These are going to be close in here. And 50. When you connect these, they're line segments. And again, since it didn't have a starting point, we put your first boundary in here so that we can bring this down like this. It shows growth. So up to this level, up to 43.5, I had this many. Up to here, I had, what was this, 10? 7. Then up to here, I had 19 ages covered. Up to here, I had this many ages covered. So it kind of gives me a look of my growth. Now, when you used to do this before with the bars, and you said this was 2, then this was 7, then this was, it kept growing like this, we did see growth this way. And that's what we used to look at. Where was the slope of your line here? But it was kind of hard to do because unless you actually separated this into chunks, you wouldn't see where your growth was. And if you put a midpoint here, it technically only says you grew up to this midpoint. You want to keep your end points here, your upper levels. So up to this point, I've accumulated this much. Up to the next boundary, I've accumulated that much. And I keep on going. It has a better presentation on this. I like it. I like your Ojai.